Right, year 7. This is the start. It should be the first lesson you have after half term. So this is the start of a slightly different way, which I'm going to be teaching history to you whilst we're off school. And I'm just going to go through it with you. Now, obviously, before half term, you were having an edu-creation lesson every time you should have had a history lesson. And that's changing slightly because I want to start doing Zoom lessons, basically. So, over the course of 2 weeks, you would have 3 history lessons with me or with Mr. Bailey. And what's going to happen now is, in those 3 lessons, you're going to have 1 edu-creations video, like this one. You're going to have 1 Zoom lesson with me, live, and 1 Firefly quiz at the end to test your knowledge on these 2. And these will all be on the days you would have history. So if you have history on Monday, week 1, you will have one of these on Monday, week 1. You don't need to worry about anything. You just need to check Firefly in the morning. You will get a either an edu-creations lesson, an invite to a Zoom, or a Firefly quiz link. And you don't need to worry about anything else. If you want to plan ahead, then you can, when you'll have history. But on the morning, I will send you the links to edu-creation, Zoom, or Firefly. And obviously, I'll be monitoring the engagement with this to fill in the spreadsheet to make sure you're all doing it. So you don't need to worry about anything. You just need to be aware you won't get an edu-creations lesson 3 times a fortnight. You'll now get 1 edu-creations, 1 Zoom invite, which I expect you to attend with pen and paper. And sit in there for the entirety. There'll be tasks for you to do, there'll be Google Forms to complete, and all that good stuff, so make sure you're there, and the Firefly quiz, and that will be the way it works going forward. Now, there may be some growing pains, and there may be some issues I find with the tech, because I'm not used to it, but it's the way I'm going to do it from now on. So you're going to have to make sure you're ready for that, and hopefully it'll be exciting. Us having Zoom lessons, that's what's going to happen. Another thing I need to say is all 3 lessons will now be on the same topic. So you have a lesson on edu-creations, a lesson on Zoom, and a quiz, all on the same thing. And the edu-creations and the Zoom will sort of work together, and you'll use both of the knowledge of those to answer your Firefly quiz, and it'll be like a multiple choice and maybe a couple of long answers for that. So that's going to be the state of play moving forward. So it's all going to be on the same topic, and the topic for your first 2 weeks are the Vikings. So as always with edu-creations, feel free to make notes on paper or on your iPad notes or on a Word document. Just make sure you're uploading a picture of your work when you're done, so I can monitor and make sure that you're doing it. Yeah, so I'm going to say what we're going to do today in this edu-creations lesson. You'll be doing other stuff in the Zoom lesson also on the Vikings, but make sure you're in that. It's completely different stuff. And then finally, you'll have a quiz which is both on this and the Zoom. So if you only come to one or the other, you're not going to do very well on the quiz, and that's going to impact your marks on my spreadsheet. So we're going to describe who the Vikings were. We're going to analyse different interpretations. I'm going to come to what an interpretation is in a minute. That's why it's in green, of the Vikings, and evaluate which interpretations are accurate. So we're going to come to that in a second. So make a title of the Vikings, put the date on if you want, but obviously I'm hoping you're keeping all these safe somewhere, or at least uploading it onto Firefly tasks so I can see that you've done it. Cool. I'm really excited about this. I will say quickly, guys, that although we've done the Norman Conquest, that topic, the Anglo-Saxon Norman, started before the Vikings but finishes after. You can sort of imagine the Vikings are in the middle. So obviously we know the Norman Conquest, the Battle of Hastings, was in 1066. Now, all this stuff today, all the Viking stuff, it sort of takes place before and after the Normans. So try not to get confused. The Normans come at the end of the Vikings, really. So the Vikings sort of exist with the Anglo-Saxons. But don't worry about it. It'll all make sense. Cool. There's 2 key concepts you're going to have to understand, and they're quite confusing. You don't need to write them down, but you need to understand what these words mean, or other parts of the lesson won't make sense. The first one is heresy. Heresy. If someone is committing heresy, they are showing beliefs that are against the principles of a particular religion. Basically, they're disagreeing with the religion, which is the main religion in that country. Now, hopefully you know that the main religion of England around sort of the 1000s, 900s was Christianity. So someone who was performing heresy, who was also known as a heretic, was someone who was disagreeing with Christianity. It was quite a big deal. These days we're far more tolerant of other religions, but in those days it was, you believe Christianity in England, or you are you are committing heresy. Another thing is free trade. A lot of big words in this, but all you need to know is the buying and selling of goods internationally without limits on the amount of goods that one country can sell to another. So basically, it's one country selling and buying things from another country and there being no limit. And that's something you've got to understand. So you've got to know heresy is disagreeing with the religion of the area, and free trade is trading goods. Could be food, could be clothes, could be animals, could be, it was people. I was going to say people traded people in the form of slaves, but there's no limit. You can go and sail over to Denmark and sell what you want with no limit. A Danish person could sail here and sell whatever they want with no limits. They're the two key concepts. If you think you're going to forget it, make a note, pause and make a note. If you think, I've got it, sir, let's get on to the lesson, then we can just move on. Lovely. Right, first thing I want you to do, pause the video and go onto your Safari or your Chrome or your Firefox, whatever you use. And I want you to Google Vikings for me, just that one word. So go do that and then come back. Go do that now. Pause it. And you don't need to do anything. Just Google it and then have in your mind what you see and then come back. All right. Hopefully you've done that. Now, you'll see when you do that, I was expecting historical pictures of Vikings. It's this. It's a TV show. It's a good TV show. It's too old for you guys, but it's a good show. But it's a TV show. And I think for me that sums up how Vikings are represented. We only really know about Vikings from TV, film and video games. So most of our interpretations of the Vikings come from TV, films and video games. So what's an interpretation before we go on, because I keep mentioning this word interpretation. An interpretation is someone's opinion or view when explaining something, and let's reword that, Mr. Baker. Interpretations can be different. An example of an interpretation would be, some of you will know I'm a Port Vale fan. In my view, Port Vale are the best football team in Stoke-on-Trent. Other people may disagree. That's an interpretation. It's my way of viewing something. So most of our ways of viewing the Vikings, our interpretation of the Vikings, come from TV, film and video games. So this is a very popular Vikings. It's on the History Channel or Amazon Prime. I want you to go and watch a YouTube clip for me. It's actually a trailer for a video game called Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Some of you will know the Assassin's Creed video games. At the end of this year, they're going to release a Viking one. I want you to go and watch this clip for me on YouTube. And I want you just to write down 3 to 5 words describing how the video presents the Vikings in it. So you'll see a lot of trees and crosses. Then towards the end, you'll see these guys getting out the boats. And I want you to tell or to write 3 to 5 words down explaining how this video presents the Vikings for me. What's the interpretation? How are they explaining the Vikings? Go and do that now for me, please. All right. Hopefully you've gone and done that. Obviously, it's a video game, and they're trying to make it exciting so they can sell copies of the video game, and I think they want to make it as exciting and as violent as possible. But if you ask me to describe how Vikings were presented in that, I would say they were described as violent, terrifying, because you saw them charging in and, got these big swords and they're jumping and, terrifying, violent, gruesome, bloodthirsty. You've probably got words like that. Scary. They were just sort of warriors. There was nothing else to them. They weren't presented in every way apart from charging in and killing people and doing damage, and then you saw everything on fire, so destructive. They destroyed things. This is a way, and it also you also get a similar perspective if you just watch the show Vikings. It's very, very violent. It's gruesome. They're just presented as these warriors who like to kill people, and they enjoyed killing people, and they enjoyed being, harsh and cruel towards people. And that's the way, as I say, most of our interpretations, guys, come from TV, film, and video games. And if you were to only learn from the Vikings from them, through Vikings, the TV show, through Assassin's Creed Valhalla, that's the view you're going to get. They were just really aggressive, violent, horrible groups of people. And the question I'm asking today is, does the media, so the media, TV, film, video games, interpret Vikings correctly? Do they have a correct interpretation? Is there a way of explaining them the correct way based on historical evidence? We've got to look today. And remember, interpretations can be different. Some people think the Vikings were fine. Some think they were horrible. You're going to decide for yourself what you think today. So we're going to look at the primary sources. Hopefully you can remember from your start of your assessment what a primary source is. Please don't tell me you've forgotten. A primary source is a source created at the time of the event. So these are sources which were made when the Vikings were knocking about in Scandinavia, in England, in Europe. And there's two types we've got to look at. Written source, so anything written down. Artifacts, remember that? It's a historical object. So anything which has been found, like from digging up the ground or in archaeology. We're going to look at them and we're going to decide whether the Vikings are interpreted correctly. Or do the media sort of only focus on the gruesome, violent bit and forget about the other bit? You're going to decide for yourself. So, this isn't a source, this is just an interpretation. I'm going to show you two interpretations and you're going to decide which one you agree with. And to decide that, you're going to look at 5 different sources. So, interpretation 1. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The pagan race was the Viking religion. Let's do that in a different colour so it doesn't get mixed up. Viking religion. So they were not Christians, the Vikings, when they came over. They were pagans. And pagan people have lots of different gods. They don't just have one like the Christians do. They have lots of... So they had a different religion to the English people when they invaded England. And you'll learn in your Zoom lesson, if you haven't already had it, on when and how they invaded. But when they invaded England, the Vikings had a different religion. They were pagans. So, never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. Alcuin of York wrote it at the time, so it's primary. The heathens, which is another word for pagans, poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God like dung in the streets. So this was made at the time by a guy called Alcuin, who I believe was a monk, or he was at least a very clever religious guy in the 900s. And he's saying these didn't believe in what we believed, and they came over and they poured out the blood of the saints around your... So a saint is someone important to Christians, and trampled on their bodies in the temple of God. So they're disrespectful. That's a terrible spelling, Mr. Baker. Disrespectful and violent. Cool. Well, not cool. I'm just saying cool because I finished what I'm writing. It's not cool at all. It's horrible. Now, remember, guys, go back to our key concepts. Heretic or heresy is a belief that is against the principles of a particular religion or Christianity. So he's basically describing them as heretics. He's saying these are committing heresy. They are going against Christianity. They are... don't believe in our God, and they throw around the blood of our saints and they trample on their bodies, and they're very violent. So this is obviously an interpretation which is very violent, like in the video games and the movies and the TV shows. However, interpretation 2. The image of wild-haired, dirty savages sometimes associated with the Vikings in popular culture, by popular culture they mean TV, video games, is a distorted picture of reality. Distorted picture of reality. It's distorted. It's not the real picture. It's been altered. And this is by a historian called Rosedahl, who wrote in a book on these pages. That basically, this image we have of these dirty savages with wild hair who go around killing people all the time, like the way Alcuin describes them in interpretation 1, isn't correct. So our question is interpretation 1 correct? Or is that they were dirty, aggressive, violent, heretic savages? Or is that not true? We're going to look at 5 sources, all primary sources, and you guys are going to decide yourselves. So before we go into them, you might want to make a table where on the one side you can label them as terrors, like the way Alcuin does. That's a quote from Alcuin, who wrote interpretation 1. I'll write that a bit clearer so you can see it. Alcuin. There we go. Or not terrors is the alternative. Try and make that E a bit more like an E. Not terrors. So agreeing with interpretation 2 of Rosedahl. So I'll just write Rosedahl. Go back to the slide if you want to know how to spell it, because I know you can't read that. Right, source 1. So, on 8th of June, 787 AD. I'll give you time to make sure you make that table before we start, so you can put the info. You don't just write source 1 on each one. Don't just write the source 1, because you don't know what source 1 means. You need to write the facts from each source on each side of the table. So on 8th of June, 787 AD, hopefully remember that AD means Anno Domini, which means in Latin, after the year Jesus Christ was born. So in 787 AD, huge numbers of violent men miserably destroyed God's church in York with robbery and so that comes from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written in 790, so 3 years after it happened. Now the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is obviously written by English people, the Anglo-Saxons. They're saying they were violent and destroyed God's church in York. So does that say they were terrorists or not terrorists? Put it on the correct side of your table for me, please. Alright, however, source 2. This is some Viking jewellery found in the 10th century. You might not be able to see it perfectly from this picture, but they're very finely made, and although it's a bit rusted because they're now 1,000 years old, these are very, very advanced for their age. They are well crafted, at the time very beautiful and very valuable jewellery, which was sort of, everyone was jealous of Viking jewellery. So think about it. These people are presented as savages, as wild men who just went around only bothered about killing people, but they were capable of making such brilliant jewellery. What's your view? Is that a sign that they were terrorists, or maybe were they not terrorists? Is this an interpretation 2 side of the argument with Rosedal? Put it in the correct one. Alright. Now, this is from something called the Sermon of the Wolf, and it's by a guy called Archbishop Wulfstan. This guy is a Christian, and he's English. Now, remember, when the Vikings invaded, they were not Christians, they were pagans, so they were viewed as heretics or committing heresy, reminding you of that concept. So, let's read what he had to say. Here, so it may seem, too many in the land are sorely injured by the wounds of sin. Here are manslayers and killers of kinsmen and murderers of priests and enemies of monasteries, and here are cruel perjurers and murderers. I mean, you don't need to understand all of it. I mean, manslayers, they are slaying men. Killers, murderers, enemies of monasteries is where monks live. And he's basically saying all that is because of sin. Now, sin in Christianity is doing bad things. So Wulfstan, which is saying this in 1010 to 1016, is saying that because English people have been sinning or not doing the correct Christian things, God is punishing us by sending manslayers and killers of kinsmen and murderers of priests and murderers and enemies of monasteries. He's blaming the sin. But how has he presented him? Has he presented him as interpretation 1, as terrors, or interpretation 2, as not terrors, as more rounded people? Put it in the correct side for me. Make sure you use details from the source. Now this, I haven't got an actual primary source, but this is an example of primary sources. There was something called the Viking sagas written in the 12th and 13th century. And the Viking sagas are basically stories which are poems. They're basically poems which still exist. And they're very, very fantastic to read. And a lot of them are still known about today. So, for example, it talks about Thor. Now, some of you who are into the superheroes will know that Thor is a member of the Marvel Universe. These stories still exist and they're still popular and are used to create the stories we learned about today to do with Thor. If you go on this website on the BBC, there's like a little cartoon for each one, there's loads. But the Vikings, who were presented as these savages by interpretation 1, is just killing everybody, and then also by this source and that source, they've created poems which still exist to this day. Still very popular, still influence the movies, the TV and the video games which we get involved with. So is that a sign that they were just murdering barbarian savages, or maybe were they not? Put it in the correct side for me, please, guys. Finally, again, I couldn't get the actual primary sources. They're very difficult to find. You have to go to like a very special library and wear gloves so it doesn't fall apart. But this is a description of a primary source. So this is from something called the Annals of Fulda, which are basically German historical documents, which someone who lived in Germany at this time wrote down what was going on at the time. And it describes the Danish king, so this guy is a Viking. King Siegfried travelled to a place called Worms to make an agreement with King Louis the German. So the Vikings made an agreement with King Louis. Their objective was to secure peace in the border areas, so that's peace in the border areas between the territories of the Danes, the Vikings, and Saxons, which are the Germans. Merchants would therefore be able to trade in peace and safety in the neighbouring empire. So in this, you've got evidence that the Vikings wanted peace, and they wanted trade. Trade's there. They wanted trade. Now remember, that goes back to our concept at the start, guys, of, let's find it, it's here, free trade, the buying and selling of goods without limits. Now, you can't trade if you're at war with people, because they're not going to let you come into the country. They're not going to let you come into the country and trade. So they wanted peace and free trade. And this wasn't just with King Louis the German. The Vikings traded all over Europe and as far east as Central Asia. So we're talking Mongolia, Kazakhstan, into Russia. They bought goods and materials such as silver, silk, spices, wine, jewellery, glass and pottery. They sold honey, tin, wheat, wool, wood, iron, fur, leather, fish and walrus ivy. They did also buy and sell slaves. So what I'm saying to you here is the Vikings wanted to trade, and they traded lots of fantastic stuff in Germany, but also all over Europe and Asia. Is that a sign that they were just barbarians who wanted to kill? I would say it doesn't. It's more in line with interpretation too. That they, it's a distorted picture that they were dirty savages. However, this source is interesting because on the one hand you've got that they wanted peace and to just make money and not to kill people, but also they were buying and selling slaves. Consider, does that go into interpretation 1? Never before has such terror appeared in Britain. The heathens poured out the blood of saints. Is this going into that interpretation as we see in the video games and the movies that they were just violent men? One thing I will say was it wasn't just the Vikings who were involved with slavery at that time. The English held slaves. Everybody held slaves in the 10th century. So, although it's bad, everybody held slaves in the 10th century. So it's up to you where you put this one. You might want to put it across the middle. You might want to put it in one or the other. You choose. Okay, so hopefully you would have filled in your table, and on the side of terrors, you'd have how they destroyed a church in York in 787 AD, and for not terrors, you talk about peace and trade, talk about jewellery, talk about sagas, which still exist. Just taking, I'm breaking down the notes. So, but you could also say how they were a punishment for sin, seen as heretics or committing heresy, as we discussed at the start. Hopefully, you've got something like that. To end the lesson, guys, because we're approaching 25 minutes now, you need to do this sentence for me. My interpretation of the Vikings is, you need to say that they were violent savages, or were not violent savages, or it can be somewhere in the middle where, yes, they were violent savages, but that isn't the only aspect of them. There was more to them. They created jewellery, they created poetry, they traded. You don't need to put in some evidence. So if you've put that they were violent savages, put some evidence in to show they were violent. If you said they were not, put in some evidence to show that they were not. If you've gone in the middle and said, yes, they were, but there was more to them, put some evidence in for both sides. So you need about, 3-4 sentences? Yeah. And one thing I'd like you to finish on, once you've written your sentence, you can pause the video, go do that now. Just to finish, guys, you just need to, one more sentence you're going to copy down. However, this is only my green interpretation, and others may interpret the Vikings differently. So let's copy that down underneath. So you've made it clear that this is what I think, but interpretations are always different. Okay, hopefully you've learned a bit from this today. Hopefully you've learned how popular culture interprets the Vikings. Hopefully you've learned the meaning of interpretation. And you've formed a judgment on which interpretation is correct. Cool. Thank you for watching us today, guys. Obviously, hopefully this was useful. You either would have had a Zoom lesson and then you've had this, or you've got a Zoom lesson coming on the Vikings where we're going to go through when they invaded and the key battles and the key Vikings. And yeah, then there'll be a Firefly quiz out for you at some point when you should have your third history lesson of the fortnight. And that's when it will just be a self-marking multiple choice just to see how well the knowledge has gone in. All of the Educreations videos are going to be uploaded to YouTube in the coming days and weeks. However, it takes a long time to save the video from Educreations, then to upload it onto YouTube. But when they're all up, I'll provide the link to the YouTube channels, Mr. Baker History or something like that. So they'll always be able to access in case you've missed any, or in case you couldn't get onto the Educreations website. As always, guys, the best way to contact me if you're struggling with stuff is jbaker@trenthamacademy.co.uk. You can contact me via the Firefly page, so if I send a task you can respond to comment to the task. However, I set tasks for all of year 7 and all of year 8 and some of year 9. There are dozens of tasks a day, hundreds of students. I'm going to miss some because there's only a certain amount of hours in the day and I've got to eat lunch. So yeah, the best way, if you want a guaranteed response, is jbaker@trenthamacademy.co.uk. But that's only if it's really important. If it's something silly, then obviously keep it on the Firefly comments and hopefully I'll see it. But if it's an important, sir, I can't do this, sir, I can't do that, jbaker@trenthamacademy.co.uk. But yeah, we've done the Vikings today. Hope it was useful. I'll either see you in the Zoom or see you, whenever your next Zoom is. Thank you very much. See you later.